So I'm making this video to show you my trick that I use to keep track of the first and last stitches in my rows of crochet so that I make sure to keep my crochet edges straight. And what I'm going to do is show you how I use stitch markers to do this, but where I place the stitch markers actually depends on the type of pattern. The first type of pattern we're going to look at is a pattern where the starting chain, also called the turning chain, does count as a stitch. And then we'll look at a pattern where that starting chain does not count as a stitch. So when the starting chain does count as a stitch, the very top of that starting chain, so in my case, it's a chain 2, the very last chain in that is going to be the top of my stitch. So I'm always going to place a marker in that very last chain. So I'll be placing markers in my chain 2. So let's get started. I'm going to start both of these with a foundation double crochet of 10. Okay, so to do this, I'm going to need my crochet hook, and I am using a size I9 or 5.5 millimeter. I'm going to need at least 2 stitch markers. I'm going to use 3 because I actually want to mark both my first stitch, my last stitch, and I want to mark my chain, the second stitch in my chain. And then of course I'm going to need some yarn to crochet with. So we are starting with a foundation double crochet. If you've never done foundation double crochet, there are a lot of really good tutorials on YouTube. I will try and give a short tutorial here. So foundation double crochet, I'm going to start with 2 chains. So 1, 2, then a yarn over and put my hook into the back of that very first chain. Then we're going to yarn over, pull up a loop. I should have 3 loops on my hook. Yarn over, pull through 1 loop on the hook, and that sets a base chain. I still have 3 loops on my hook. Yarn over, pull through 2 loops. Yarn over, pull through the last 2 loops on your hook. And that is my first stitch. So I am actually going to mark that as my first stitch so I know and can keep track of where that first stitch is located. I put my marker through both loops of that first stitch. To do the rest of my foundation, I'm going to yarn over, and we had made that base chain, so I'm going to go ahead and go through both loops of that first chain. There we go, through both loops of that first chain. I'm going to yarn over and pull up a loop. I should have 3 loops on my hook. Yarn over, pull through 1 loop. I still have 3 loops on my hook. There's my base chain. I'm actually going to hold on to that with my middle finger and my thumb. Yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2. There's my second stitch. And I'm just going to repeat that across until I have 10 stitches. So we're going through both loops of that base chain. We yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 1, and that's my base chain again. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Now we have 3 stitches. So I'll meet you back here when I have 10 foundation double crochets. Okay, so I'm just about at the end. I have 9 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stitches. I'm going to make my last foundation double crochet. I yarn over, go through both of those loops in that base chain, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 1, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. That is my last stitch of that round, so I'm actually going to mark that stitch because I do want to keep track of it. The first example that we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and set this down. And the first pattern type we're going to look at is this pattern where the starting chain does count as a stitch. So when we look at this, I'm going to be chaining 2. I will mark that second chain, but in row 1 it's telling me to skip the first stitch. So we're going to see why I've marked both of these stitches on either end when we get to this. So I'm supposed to chain 2. So we'll chain 1, 2, and I want to mark that second chain. I'm going to go ahead and put my marker through both of those loops. Close my marker and turn my work. So I'm supposed to skip my first stitch. Well, that's what this pink marker is marking, is my first stitch. So I will double crochet not in the stitch where that marker is, but in the top of the next stitch. So there's my marker. There's my marker, there's my next stitch. So we're going to double crochet in that next stitch. Oops. Double crochet in that next stitch. And I'm going to go ahead and remove my pink marker because it has now served its purpose for this row. And I want to crochet across. I should have 10 stitches at the end. In this type of pattern, this chain 2 counts as a stitch. So right now I have 1, which is this first marked first marked starting chain, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and now I'm at that very first stitch of my foundation row that's marked, so I know that's the last stitch I'm stitching in, and yay, that is my 10th stitch across. Once I stitch in there, I can remove my marker. I'm going to take my pink marker again, telling me I'm at the end. We're going to go ahead and put that pink marker in that 10th stitch I just made so I can keep track of that. And so we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 stitches in this row. I'm going to repeat this process, so I'm going to go ahead and chain 1, 2, and take my green marker, put it in that second chain. I like to go through both loops of that second chain, so putting it in the top of that second chain that I just made, and I'm going to turn my work, skipping the first stitch. So I'm skipping the stitch that pink marker is in. I'm going to yarn over, start in the next top of the next stitch, going through both, and I'm going to go ahead and crochet across. So again, we'll go ahead and remove our pink marker. It has served its purpose. Green tells us where 1 is, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and my blue marker has the top of my chain 2 marked, so I know where to go for that last one. So we'll yarn over, go through both of those loops that blue marker is marking, double crochet in that stitch for our 10th stitch. I'm going to mark that 10th stitch, and now I can remove my blue marker because it has served its purpose. So if we take a look at this, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And this gives me pretty nice straight edges. We'll do one more row to be able to get a look at how straight those edges go. So we chain 2, 1, 2, put a marker in our second chain. So I go through both of those loops to mark it, turn, yarn over, skip the pink stitch, so skipping pink, going into the next one, double crocheting. Our pink marker has served its purpose, so we can go ahead and take that marker off. So we have 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and our 10th stitch is going to go in that marked chain. And you can remove the stitch marker before placing this stitch. I'm just trying to keep it there so we can really see how this is working out and where our stitches are going. So my 10th stitch is going to go here. That's my last stitch. So I'm going to place my pink marker because it's my last stitch. And we'll remove our green marker. And now we can really see how nice and straight those edges are when we use this method. So the next method we're going to take a look at is when your crochet pattern, instead of saying that your starting chain does count as a stitch, we're going to look at a pattern where our starting chain does not count as a stitch. And so I'm starting with the same foundation double crochet of 10 foundation double crochets. We'll chain 2 and turn. But when I look at the rest of the pattern, there is no double crocheting in a chain. We're just double crocheting in each stitch across. Rows 2 through 5, we're repeating that same pattern. So let's take a look at what that would look like. Okay, so I've repeated my foundation double crochet. I marked the first stitch. I have 9 stitches right now, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We're going to make our 10th foundation double crochet. There's 10. I'm going to use that same trick of marking that last stitch. And our pattern said to chain 2, 1, 2, and turn. I'm not using this chain as a stitch though, so I'm not going to bother marking it. I'm supposed to double crochet in each stitch across, which does mean that I am going to double crochet in this first pink marked stitch. So if my starting chain does not count as a stitch, I will crochet in my pink marked stitch. So we're going to go ahead and double crochet in that stitch. And now, instead of just removing my marker, this is now my first stitch of this round. So double crocheted in that pink marked stitch, I want to mark my first stitch. So this is the top of that first stitch that I just made. We're going to go ahead and mark that, and we're going to double crochet across. So I have one, just this one. This chain does not count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and my last stitch goes in my green marked stitch, so there's 10. I'm going to mark my last stitch again so I can keep track of it, because the last stitch of this round is where my first stitch of my next round goes. So I've got markers on either end. I can remove my green marker. It has served its purpose, and I have a marker on each end. We're going to chain 2, 1, 2, turn. My chain does not count as a stitch, so I'm not placing a marker in my chain. I am going to crochet in this first stitch, the pink marked stitch. So I'll go ahead and double crochet in that marked stitch and place a marker in the top of that first double crochet. Now I can remove my pink marker. I have 1 stitch, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and my last stitch is going in my blue marked stitch, which is a double crochet from the previous row. Okay, that was my 10th stitch, so we're going to mark it with the pink marker. We'll remove our blue marker because it has served its purpose. I'll go ahead and pull this up so we can take a look at what we have. We have 1 in the pink marked stitch, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in this marked stitch. We can see those edges stay fairly straight too. We'll do a couple more rounds just to see how those edges might differ just a little bit from our chain started rounds where our chains did count as a stitch. Chain 2, double crochet in that first stitch, the pink marked stitch. Place our marker so we know that's our first stitch. Remove our pink marker. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So red marker, pink marker, green marker, chain 2, turn, double crochet in stitch with the pink marker, place our green marker top of that stitch, remove our pink marker. So we have 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, and last stitch. Take a look at this. I'm going to go ahead and remove that blue marker. Take a look at this. They're fairly straight edges. We're always going to get a little bit of a scallop with this type, where you can see those little bits of scallop in there. The bulkier the yarn, the more noticeable the scallop is going to be with this. So I'm using a DK yarn, so a size 3 yarn in this, which makes it a little less bulky and a little less obvious. I hope this helps with your crochet.